One misconception about Bruce Lee is that he was a child movie star in Hong Kong. He was almost like the counterpart of Mickey Rooney here in Hollywood, or Judy Garland, Annette Funicello. He was a big child star. He was chauffeured around, and that just simply wasn't the case. He did appear in movies from time to time. In those years, China, in Hong Kong, they didn't have child movie stars. They had children who appeared in movies, and for the most part, Bruce led a fairly normal life. He lived with his family on Nathan Road in an upstairs apartment. I think there were 2 families that lived there. There were a lot of people that lived in that small apartment. But he went to school. He got in trouble. He was at times a delinquent, like a lot of kids. But he led a relatively normal life. He wasn't this sheltered movie star in Hong Kong. I had a similar entry into Hollywood as a kid. I first appeared in the TV series The Real McCoys, filmed at Desilu Studios. I think I was 12 or 13 years old, and I worked in some film, some TV as a kid. I know my brother was on House Party, Art Linkletter's House Party, as a guest. And I went on to school. I went on to college, just like Bruce Lee had done. And then I got my big break in 1969 when Blake Edwards walked into the Kempo school and was looking for an instructor to come to the house and teach him and his son and his soon-to-be wife, Julie Andrews, Kempo. They wanted someone to come up and teach private lessons. I really didn't want the job, but he offered me so much money, I said, okay, I'll do it. Great idea. At the time, I was living in a small bachelor apartment on Bear. It was one room, a hot plate, a bathroom, and a closet. I think I paid $85 for the place. I was going to UCLA. I was going to become a doctor, driving a '64 Volkswagen. And I was working several jobs. I was teaching Kempo, and now I was teaching Blake at his house. I was selling men's clothes, and in the summer I worked as a lifeguard. So around October, he came to me and he said, listen, I'm making a movie. I'm making a film with MGM Studios, and if you'd like to come along, I can teach you the business, and I'll find something for you to do. And I said, well, great. And what my job was I was hired as William Holden's stand-in double. William Holden, you know, the Academy Award-winning actor, Golden Boy, a big leading man in the 50s, and one hell of a human being. And I was hired as his stand-in stuntman, and not stuntman, but stand-in double. And Blake got me in the Screen Extras Guild, which meant a lot of benefits. And in the first part of October, I walked out into the front of the Rio Rico Hotel in Nogales, Arizona, dressed in Western clothes, the same as Bill, because you know, they had to light me, and I had to wear the same wardrobe he had. Freezing in Nogales, Arizona, waiting for the crew bus to come. And a guy walks over to me and he hands me an envelope and he says, "Here's your per diem." And I said, "Per diem?" He said, "Yeah, here's your per diem." And he walked away. I opened the envelope and there's a ton of money in there. And I thought, what is a per diem? Is that my salary? You know, for the month, that's a lot of money here. And it was cash. So I asked one of the old guys, I said, "Hey, what is this money for?" He said, "Well, that's just your expense money." I said, "Expenses?" He said, "Yeah, you know, drinks at the bar, you know, whatever you want it for." A lot of people send, a lot of guys send it home, but, you know, whatever you need. I couldn't, that's my bar bill? You kidding? And that's how it went. I wasn't on that film for 3 weeks, and Blake walked over to me and he said, "Listen," he said, we don't need to light you anymore. We can light a tree, or we can just find somebody. Your job is to keep Bill happy. He really likes you. And so you just keep him. That's your job for the rest of the thing. And I'll help. You can come in the editing room with me, and I'll teach you how to make films. And I like the sound of that because it was cold. We were shooting a lot of scenes in the snow, and it was freezing. And Bill had a heated trailer. We played Spike and Malice, and we drank beer. And when we moved locations, we would, you know, the company would often fly, but Bill had his Mercedes 600 with him, and so we drove all over the western part of the United States in that Mercedes 600, drinking beer and you know, listening to music on the stereo, and it was just one hell of a time. And then when that was all over, by that time I had over the next, you know, 6 months, I had worked my way into meeting a lot of people in Hollywood through Bill and through Ryan and through just being at MGM, and I wound up going to A-list parties. At one point I actually met Mae West at her house, at Glenn Ford. I just was running in A-list parties, but the bottom line was I was completely overwhelmed. Bruce Lee's entry into Hollywood was very similar to mine. We almost, you know, walked a parallel journey into Hollywood. Yeah, like me, he began in you know, working in childhood films, and when he came to the United States, he had no experience of Hollywood. He'd never been in Hollywood. He landed in San Francisco and eventually found his way to Seattle, and then in 1964 found his way to Long Beach, California, where he gave his legendary Kung Fu demonstration at the Internationals. And it was there, of course, that he was discovered by Ed Parker and others. Eventually ended up having a screen test for the Green Hornet and went to work, got the job on the Green Hornet series as Kato, working for Bill Dozier. And the series, it ran for a while, but it really didn't do well. It was, you know, eventually canceled. But what that did for Bruce was it got his foot in the door, and it gave him a calling card. My calling card was that Blake had noticed that I had a writing talent, and he was interested in mentoring me as a writer, and which he did. And I went on to work for him for years as a writer, and then I worked for others. For Bruce, his calling card and his entry, which really interested other people initially, was his martial art. There was nobody in the Los Angeles area who could compare to what Bruce Lee was doing. He was maybe Ed Parker, Ed Parker was teaching a lot of celebrities. I'm wrong about that. Ed Parker was teaching a lot of celebrities. But Ed Parker was really busy with a lot of other things, where Bruce's main focus was getting into the film industry. That's what he wanted when he wrote his definite aim in life, was he wanted to become rich and famous. He wanted to become a movie star. So he managed to befriend Steve McQueen, who was a huge star then, James Coburn, Roman Polanski. He met several writers. He met Sterling Silliphant, who at that time was the poet laureate of 1960s television. He also met Joe Hyams, who was a well-known writer, biographer, had written many books. And so he was networking out. He was going to Hollywood parties. He was flown to Switzerland and England to teach. He was earning $250 an hour to teach Kung Fu. He told Dr. Walpin, I saw it in the medical notes, that he was making $1,000 an hour. Well, in the late 60s, that's a lot of money. But even $250 an hour, you know, teaching Kung Fu, that's a lot of money. But these Hollywood movie stars could pay it. So that kept him alive, and then the money that he made from the Green Hornet kept him going. But when the Hornet series was canceled and he was laid up with his back injury for a while, he really got into financial trouble. And that's when James Coburn came to him and said, you know, you are going to die in television. This is not going to be your wheelhouse. What you want to do is you really need to take up Raymond Chow in his offer to make these movies in Hong Kong. Well, actually, one was in, I think they were in Thailand. The original was in Thailand. And Bruce wisely took Jim Coburn's advice and went to Hong Kong. But that was his entry. It was like mine. It was martial arts. But he had a calling card. He had his Kung Fu, which introduced him around and got him in with some really big people. And Sterling Silliphant was really helpful for him, because Sterling had written him several parts and got him work on television, which got him into the unions and got him the benefits and got him, more notoriety for him. But he wisely, after doing all that networking and becoming known among some big people in Hollywood, he got his first major break going to Hong Kong and doing those films for Raymond Chow. He rolled the dice and it paid off. Those films in Hong Kong made him a star throughout the Pacific Rim. Didn't do much for him here in the United States because those movies didn't really air here. But they made him a big star in the Pacific Rim. But he was still dealing with U.S. TV and Hong Kong filmmaking. There's no comparison between that and Hollywood major motion picture productions in a big studio. And that he was about to find out. In the same manner that I found myself completely overwhelmed working on Wild Rovers for Blake Edwards in 1970. I think Bruce was equally overwhelmed when he went to work at Warner Brothers making Enter the Dragon. There's a wonderful video on YouTube of Bruce at Paramount. He rides up on a bike. He's being interviewed, and you see him in the distance, and he rides up on this bicycle. He's wearing overalls, and he's working on the Green Hornet, and you can tell he's like a happy kid. He looks great. He sounds great. He's laughing. He just looks relaxed and at home, and he's just having fun. And then you look at him when he's footage of him when he's making Enter the Dragon, and you realize all the problems he got into and all the arguments he got into and the battles that he got into on the set, and you realize that it was a huge difference. And he was under a tremendous amount of stress. It just was a whole different world. Bruce Lee would have realized early on that film was a make or break for him. He wasn't going to get a second bite of the apple. He wasn't going to get to unring that bell. He was going to have one shot at this fame and fortune at Warner Brothers, and it was all on him. He realized early on, I'm sure, that if that film failed, he would get all the blame. It was a martial arts picture, and he was the star of the picture. So if it bombed at the box office, he's going to get the blame. It's not going to be Robert Klaus. It's not going to be Paul Heller. It's certainly not going to be Ted Ashley, who at that time was the head of Warner Brothers. They weren't going to take any blame for that. It was going to be Bruce, and he was going to have a hard time finding work if that happened. If that movie bombed. And he realized early on that only he knew how to do these martial arts fights, and he didn't even like the script in the beginning. I remember, if you read one of the drug letters, he talks about he's writing Enter the Dragon. He's writing the script, which wasn't true. It was written by Michael Allen. But Bruce said he was writing the script, and I'm sure he was trying to rewrite the script. I know that in the beginning there were several days he didn't show up for the first few days to the set. He wouldn't show up. And they had to shoot around him. And Linda and they almost fired him. And I mean, they were going to fire him. They said he either gets down here and goes to work or where he's fired. And Linda said, please, hold. And she finally got him. I know what was bothering. I'm pretty sure I know what was bothering Bruce. It's another thing that we shared in common. But Bruce stuttered. A lot of people didn't know that. Jesse Glover mentioned it in his book, and I knew about it from being around Bruce. Why? Because I stuttered as a kid. I stuttered in junior high school. It was horrible. It caused a lot of problems for me. It was all part of my becoming a delinquent. It's horrible when you stutter as a kid. Well, Bruce stuttered. And Jesse Glover said that he was real self-conscious about it, and if somebody laughed at him when he was stuttering, he would completely flip out. I mean, really get angry. I understood Bruce. I know exactly what he went through. He was worried that he was going to go down to that set and he's not going to be able to talk. And he'd have all those lights and cameras on him and all that money, and to run a film company costs a lot of money, per hour. And I think he kept trying to change the script, the words of the script, and that's how I know that's what he was doing. But he managed to get through it, and I'm sure that the battles he was having constantly was because he wanted this script to be perfect. He knew that nobody knew how to make martial arts on film as he did. He had already proven that by the first two films he made for Raymond Chow. So he was very nervous about anybody else setting up these fight scenes, and he didn't like the script, and he was changing that, and he went to war with a lot of people. I mean, it went on for the whole picture. And he was under a lot of stress because he knew this was on him. This was his one big chance. And there's one trait that Bruce had that worked in his favor many times, but it was a double-edged sword. And that was he was extremely impatient. He had very little patience for anybody. If he wanted something done his way, he wasn't the most patient person at all. And that would have led him to a lot of problems because he was short-fused. And it did lead to problems. I think that's how the drugs came into play. I think he couldn't sleep, and he started doing that, and he couldn't wake up, and he started, and the drugs, it calmed him down. He kept ordering more and more hash and more pot and more coke and more, I think he just got, the drugs were his crutch. It got him calmed down, but it also woke him up to do the job that he had to do. And of course on the sideline too, he was having all this problem now with the media. In Hong Kong they call it the Mosquito Press. And at first they started playing real nice with him. They were good guys. They were going to play real nice with Bruce. But that changed. And after a while he became, he was a target. And I don't think a day went by that they weren't looking for some headline about him. And I know Linda said she dreaded getting up in the morning because she knew what the headlines were going to be. Some horrible story, some big breaking story about Bruce, most of which was untrue. And she said at one point, she said, I think I've seen her say that that she wishes that she could take back those last 3 years in Hong Kong. I think she said that. And knowing what went on there, and for what is pretty well known, I could see where she felt that way. You look at the video of Bruce when he was at Paramount on that bicycle, and then you look at him at Enter the Dragon, he was a completely changed man. And those who had gone to see him said they don't know who this guy is. He's not the same Bruce. And I think that was around the time that Bruce said, told Linda when he said, I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. And God bless him for trying. He gave it everything he had. He really did. And I don't know if I would have been in his shoes, I would have done it any differently. He had a monumental task, and he gave it his best shot. And it certainly paid off. Enter the Dragon, to this day, is the biggest martial arts movie ever made. It's grossed over $1 billion. His legacy can certainly be proud of the work that he gave us in his films.